This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to Core Brain Journal. It's a place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street.
Well, welcome, folks. Dr. Charles Parker back one more time here at Core Brain Journal, and we have a highly esteemed guest today, an internationally prominent expert on cognition, one of our favorite topics. You know, so often in this country, we're treating thinking without thinking about thinking. It is amazing to me that the criteria for treating individuals with thinking problems is still appearances. Now, you know I already think about this. So our guest today is none other than Dr. Ned Hallowell. And welcome, Ned. We're so happy to have you on board.
Great to be with you, Chuck, and thank you for all you do. It's a wonderful thing. You're producing this podcast and writing your books and all the many contributions you've made.
You're very kind. I mean, it's fun working together, even though it's a distant. You know, folks who don't know, 1994, Dr. Hallowell with Dr. John Rady wrote Driven to Distraction. 1994 was the beginning of the change of the revolution in mind science, and Dr. Hallowell was one of the people who brought that to the American public and say, hey guys, we're missing a tremendous amount here. So we'll come back and talk more about his introduction in just a moment. First of all, I'm going to share with you a little word from our sponsors. You listeners already know how much we love the reality of data here at CBJ, and today we welcome our clinical friend and our new sponsor partner, Direct Health Access Laboratory. With over 3 million studies, they are deep leaders of experience with the big picture of measuring, for example, methylation, cryptopyrrole, and copper challenges. They have a global service with a molecular focus. Stay tuned and check them out at dhalab.com/core. And then you also know how much we appreciate detailed improvements of mind care on many levels. And today we're also pleased to welcome a new sponsor and partner with a deep interest in fresh options to address the complexity of adolescent treatment failure nationally and internationally. For 80 years, the nonprofit Barry Robinson Center teams in Norfolk, Virginia, provide residential care on an evolved, family, interpersonal, indeed global level. They're TRICARE friendly. Take a look at their website, barryrobinson.org/core. You can see that's BARRY Robinson.org/core. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Hallowell. Honestly, it would take me the full half hour to read his entire CV. The gentleman has been very strong in multiple levels of contribution to mind science, including no less than 20 books on various psychological topics, including attention deficit disorder, the power of human connection, childhood roots of happiness in life, and managing excessive busyness. He's an internationally recognized speaker. He's presented to thousands on topics such as ADHD, strategies on handling your fast-paced life, childhood roots of adult happiness. He's been on the Today Show, Dateline, Good Morning America, The Jane Pauley Show, and The View, and many more. New York Times, USA Today, Newsweek. I'm not going to continue to read it. I'm just going to say thank you so much for joining us. And just document one more time, Driven to Distraction changed all of our lives. Mine specifically, when the light dawned on me in 1996. Thank you very much, Ned, for shining the light over my way.
Thank you, Chuck.
So what we want to do is hear a little bit about Dr. Hallowell. What are you doing right now? What's your favorite topic? What are you fired up and passionate about? You got so many irons in the fire. I know you started a podcast.
I've got this wonderful podcast going. You and I both. Mine is called Distraction. And every Monday I go down to a studio in New Haven, and a marvelous outfit called CRN produces it, which I couldn't possibly do what you're doing, Chuck, do it on my own. So I admire you. Hats off to you. My podcast, Distraction, someone else does it for me. I mean, I talk the words, but they do the engineering, which I've got a wonderful producer and a wonderful engineer. The producer, Sarah Curtin, the engineer, Scott Person. They're terrific. So I'm excited about doing that. I also have just finished writing a memoir, which is totally different from anything I've ever written. It's not about ADD at all. It's about my childhood and my training, early training in psychiatry. The title is Because I Come from a Crazy Family, The Making of a Psychiatrist. And, it won't come out. It takes them the book is done, but it takes them forever to publish it, so it won't come out until June of next year. But I've really poured a lot of stories into that, and my heart and soul, really. And now I'm embarking on a new book. It's been over 10 years since Delivered from Distraction came out, so John Rady and I are doing the third in our series of distraction books, and that'll come out sometime in 2018. So I'm collecting stories for it, and John is collecting theories, and we have our collaboration down pretty well by now.
John is a great guy. I mean, you guys are a pair. You must have a great time putting it together because you have such interesting perspectives.
We do. We really do. And I'm lucky he was my chief resident, so in psychiatry. So we go back all the way to 1979. And we've become wonderful friends in the process. And it's been a terrific collaboration. Sort of like Gilbert and Sullivan, I guess.
Well, what happens with me, Ned, one of my pet peeves is this whole thing about cognition and thinking. And it's amazing to me how dysfunctional we are regarding dealing with brain function as a means of understanding human beings and the complexity of the human mind. I mean, we skip this over all the time. And one of the things I'm concerned about, and I make a clarification about this with every evaluation I do, is a person said, well, are you telling me that I have attention deficit disorder? And I said, well, I look at attention deficit disorder as sort of the stepchild of executive function. It's the visible person, and it's the child that's out of control, or in some ways more visibly out of control. They don't have to be hyperactive, of course. But executive function is a larger picture where we see individuals who have really cognitive disarrays going on that are not overtly visible, and yet they're suffering with them throughout their lives. And I know you're an expert on that. Would you like to address that point at all?
Oh, yeah, very much so. I mean, what's cool is we're discovering more and more, as you know, I don't think of ADD as a disorder. I think of it as a trait. And if you manage it right, it can become an asset. And if you don't, you can end up in prison. So it's a very interesting two-edged sword that has advantages that go with it and significant disadvantages. And one of the disadvantages that John and I have been talking about is this thing called the default mode network. And I'm so excited about this because it explains so much. Let me take a minute and explain it. So when you're engaged in a task, there are 4 regions of the brain that light up, and you can see this on fMRI. So this is not theory at all. And what activates is called the task positive network, the TPN. So when you're engaged in a task, that lights up and you're swimming along and you're functioning well. But when you finish the task, when you finish baking the loaf of bread or composing the song or whatever it is you're doing, the old thinking was that the brain goes silent. It sort of goes offline. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. The fact is, your brain consumes more energy, more glucose, when it's not in the task positive network than when it is. And what lights up are 4 other centers of the brain in the default mode network, the DMN, which I call the demon. Why do I call it the demon? Because the demon bubbles up, particularly in people with ADD, bubbles up all the negative stuff. And I'd use another S word if I weren't,
on air.
All the negative stuff that we so often contend with, the worries, the self-critique, the I'm bad, life is bad, everything's bad, the awfulizing, the saying I'm going to be broke on the street and I'm a loser and I'm no good. And this stuff just bubbles up. And what happens is we get riveted by it because it's gripping. You don't say he was riveted in contentment. You do say he was riveted in worry and fear and negative thinking. And this is the demon. This is the DMN at work. And so, and it reflects so many of us with ADD, including myself. And the beauty of this insight is you can control it. So how do you control it? You control it by calling it blah, blah, blah. One of the people who has a piece on YouTube about it just calls it the blah, blah, blah network. So when that starts bubbling up, just say blah, blah, blah. And then you have to focus on something else. So to reconnect with the task positive network. And what I suggest, since it's always with you, is that you focus on your breathing. So, but it has to be a specific pattern of breathing, enough of it that you focus on it. So like 8 beats in, hold 3 beats, 8 beats out, hold 3 beats. And if you do that, you re-engage, you reignite the task positive network, and you shut off the demon. It's such a powerful insight because so many of myself included, contend with this relentless downtime, your sort of reposed position of worry, negative thinking, gloom and doom. Sometimes they end up getting treated for depression when that's not what it is, or you're treated for anxiety, which is not what it is. It's just the DMN going out of control, and you can shut it off simply by focusing on something else.
That is so interesting. I'm looking forward to reading about it. I mean, that's something I haven't been tracking, but it's so interesting from this point of view. I can't tell you how many people I've interviewed who are saying similar things without having that knowledge and that linguistic system to hang the hat on.
It's new to John and me as well, but it's not new to neuroscience. There's a radiologist who discovered it, Rakeley, out at Washington University in St. Louis about 10 years ago. But if you Google the DMN, the default mode network, you'll see there's a ton of stuff now. There's a guy at MIT, Gabrielli, who's been leading the way. It's, I think, the really hot new topic that is going to explain so much of the negative aspects of ADD that don't get subsumed under executive function disorder. Because 2 of the centers in the DMN are the hippocampus and the amygdala. So the hippocampus shoots up all the negative memories that you've ever had. And the amygdala, of course, shoots up fear and rage. And so you get these 2 poisonous, every negative thing you've ever done, and send that through the anger or fear center, and you're bathing in misery in seconds.
The interlopers come in and create unmanageable cognitive abundance. They just run the show.
Yes.
And then the issue is you got to figure out a way to turn them off. And I hadn't heard about that it's a meditative experience, it sounds like.
Yeah, but you don't even have to meditate, just focus on your breathing. It's breathing is an incredibly powerful tool that we sort of take for granted, but by focusing on it, and you have to do more than just focus in, out, in, out. Give yourself a specific pattern, something that's complex enough to demand your attention, to take your attention away from the DMN, because the DMN is always sucking on you. It's why we people with ADD always have the feeling that we're never 100% there. That's the DMN sucking away at you, trying to pull you out of the present moment. And so, you really... You really need things to put your full focus on. Like right now talking to you, I'm fully focused on what we're talking about. And if I weren't, that DMN would be pulling me out of this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to tell you, this reminds me of the conversation, the presentation that you did, Chad, several years ago. And it's been a theme of yours. So, I've listened to you on YouTube and so on. But the whole business of that whole accelerator metaphor, the brake and the accelerator, and
right.
how you keep all of that organized when you're driving the car down the road,
right.
and have so many people just keep that hammer down,
yeah.
and they don't have a consciousness that in fact that foot is on the pedal is on the metal.
Right, right, right. And that's the blessing and the curse of ADD is we have this powerful engine, but we have devil of a time controlling it. You're slowing it down. And so that explains the good stuff we do, but the trouble we get into.
Well, Ned, I'm going to come back and ask you this question. And this is a deeper question. It's the reason I want to kind of do the sponsor thing real quickly here, because this deeper question is really, simply stated, where are we going? I mean, we have a whole issue here. You're saying something that is going to be exciting and different for a number of people, but we have so many people in this country who are really just thinking, okay, we're going to do meds for that symptom. We're going to just get some meds done, and that's going to be it. So the question I'm going to ask you when we get back after we take a brief break here is, where collectively should we be going with the diversity of information, the complexity of mind science that we're dealing? What should the ordinary person on the street think about that evolution? And what should our medical professionals undertake to move the needle forward to actually intercede more constructively with the people they treat? That's a big, big question. Mm-hmm. Something to think about. So we're going to take a brief break, folks, and we're going to put Dr. Hallowell on the spot when we get back and see what he thinks about that question. So back in a minute. Well, folks, you know as well as I do that psychiatric treatment failure, especially after multiple medication trials and those very, very brief hospitalizations, may prove insufficient to deal at home with the complexity of troubled children and those adolescents from 6 to 17 years old. Improved care, those next mandatory steps, should include a more comprehensive approach to address those multiple levels of challenges, from family to peers to school, diagnostically from defiance to depression, on every level for families, including military families internationally. The Barry Robinson Center's 32-acre open college-like campus in Norfolk, Virginia, provides safety and security and clean, comfortable living. How do we know? We refer folks over there all the time, strongly endorse what they're doing. So for further information, an informed interview, connect at this page, barryrobinson.org/core. Well, you folks already know that here at Core Brain Journal, we're on a mission to introduce you to resources that make significant contributions to the investigation of those predictable mind science applications. Our colleagues at DHA Lab Group provide a real difference with treatment options for people at every level, from first awareness of mind problems to those frustrating times when even well-informed treatment becomes surprisingly unpredictable. For my entire professional life, from psychoanalysis to brain scans, I've searched for, yes, improved predictability. The good news for all of us, from professionals to patients, remarkably effective research offers useful, cost-effective, organic options far beyond guesswork with psychiatric medications alone. DHA lab tests measure unbalanced biomedical details through easily available testing, now available globally for a variety of molecular answers from, for example, methylation, copper, and cryptopyrrole challenges. Check in for more details at dhalab.com core. That's dhalab.com/core. Well, here we are back, folks, and Dr. Hallowell, the simple statement is that what do we do about it? Part of what you were talking about there is something we can do about it. But I think in a certain way, and one of the reasons it's such a pleasure talking to a guy like you, because you've got such a diversity of information, so your deep knowledge. The next question is, there's a science that we're trying to move forward, and yet there's also a translation of the science down to the public, which is why you're doing your podcast and why you're here on mine, because we're both trying to make something happen with the public. My own feeling is, and I'll maybe state a little more easily, if the public understands what's going on, I think they're going to contribute significantly to the evolution of mind science. I think we medical professionals are really stuck in an outdated mode of dealing with the complexity of this problem. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, the more we can educate the public, the better off we'll all be. There's no field of medicine where implementation lags behind the science more dramatically than in mental health. We know a lot more than we use. we know a lot more than the public accesses. And part of that is because, centuries, millennia of stigma make people afraid of it. Part of that is because there are irresponsible people, writing scary tracts that scare people away. And part of it is just that, in this information age, it's very hard to separate what's true from what isn't true. But the good news is most of what we know is really useful. The bad news is people aren't using it. So
isn't that's so true?
My motto as a clinician, and you and I are both clinicians, we actually see patients, we don't just theorize, is whatever works as long as it's safe and it's legal. So fortunately, we have a lot of tools in our toolbox. There's a lot of interventions that work. And around ADD, the one that leads the way is the one that people fear the most, namely medication. I mean, medication happens to be, when it's used properly, very safe and very effective. But most people think, oh my God, no, it's terribly dangerous and it's overprescribed and you're going to get addicted and you're going to become psychotic and all this kind of scary stuff that, now the future, I think the future lies in non-medication interventions, but we're not there yet. We're getting there. And certainly, the mainstays of the non-medication interventions have been with us forever. Exercise, diet, sleep, meditation, those have always been with us, and they're extremely important. John Rady wrote a whole book about the power of exercise in the brain. So for sure, we have very reliable non-medication interventions. But in terms of what you go to a doctor for, the medications are very safe, very effective, and a true godsend as long as they're used properly.
And that is the point, used properly.
Yeah.
Because so many people wind up saying, asking very amorphous questions and have amorphous targets and unclear ideas of what the medication should really do in the first place. I mean, my own thought about it is I think increasingly we're reaching a point where people who are going to use controlled substances to treat executive function challenges almost need a separate certification if they're going to take that level of responsibility on. Because, of course, the problem with that, of course, it would prevent a lot of people who are trying to do the best job they can just by using the symptoms alone. And there are a lot of people that wouldn't be helped if we did that kind of certification process because,
right.
That is a problem. But on the other hand, something like that does need to be done, even if it's not a 3-year residency somewhere. Are you certified? Do you know what these medications do? Do you know what the specific medication duration of effectiveness should be? That sort of thing. So,
right. And again, obviously, it always comes back to education of the patient, of the doctor, of the family, and a respect for the power of these medications, so that they're not used willy-nilly and without proper supervision. Some of these people ask me, do you believe in Ritalin? And my answer is, it's not a religious principle. It's a medication, and when you use it right, it can be wonderful, and if you use it wrong, it can be horrible. So unfortunately, medication ADD becomes sort of a hot button issue, and all kinds of emotions come into play when what we really need is the cool light of science.
Well, I think you did a good job with that when you had the business book. I don't recall the title of it right now, where you were talking about executives and how their performance levels really were, they weren't hyperactive. They weren't standing on their desks. They weren't throwing pencils at each other. But they had a certain measure of inefficiency based on executive function challenges. I think that was a very interesting contribution because it takes it to the public in a much more utilitarian way. Because
the number one request executives have these days is not for new strategy, new marketing, new tax, what have you. It's increased focus. How do we deal with the information overload, with the age of distraction that we live in? How do we retain focus and operate at our best? Tim Armstrong, who took over AOL, and AOL combined with Yahoo and Verizon, huge company, is very open about his having ADD himself. And he mandated in that enormous company what he calls 10% think time, where each executive is required to spend 10%, only 10% of every work week thinking, sitting alone in a room with no electronic device, no meeting, no agenda, no distraction, and just thinking. And he said it's amazing how productivity increased, how people actually wrestled with ideas and thought them out instead of just shooting from the hip and saying, oh, try this, try that, try this, try that. They'd come into his office with an actually well thought out idea.
We've had that whole thing is so interesting. I saw a guy, and his name doesn't occur to me right off, who lectured to Google and was really talking about meditation and how his own anxiety was so overwhelming, and that meditation actually helped him find peace within himself, organize his thoughts, and actually behave more productively in his work. I mean, that whole thing is I think the business people are paying attention to it, no question about it.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
So then you also had another book, which I thought was interesting, because you've talked and spoken through words on a number of issues regarding the development of the family. And it sounds like that's kind of where you're going a little bit on a personal level. You may be telling a personal story, but it sounds like you're going into that larger conversation of being understood even as a child.
Well, my most cherished goal in life was to create the happy family I didn't have. And I didn't have a happy family growing up. It was no one's fault. It was just accidents of genetics and fate. But I really wanted more than anything to find a woman who would, with whom I could create a family and give those three kids the happy childhood that I so wanted for myself. And now they're 28, 25, and 22, and I can honestly say Sue and I did it. They I don't know what's going to happen for the rest of their lives, but they did have, and each of them would tell you, a very happy childhood. It's funny, I wrote a note for my newsletter where I was saying vacation is overrated, and people, I don't particularly like vacation because I like my work. And Rick Lavoie, one of the wonderful figures in the field, wrote me a note saying, Ned, what are you talking about? Be careful now. You don't want to overlook your family. And I wrote back and I said, Rick, first of all, thank you so much for looking out for me. I really appreciate it. I need that. But I can promise you could interview my three kids and they would tell you to a person that I've been there every second of the way. It's been my top priority, and really nothing has given me the satisfaction. Of course, I could never have done it without Sue. I mean, she's been the rock, the mainstay. I mean, she's the most amazing woman in the world, and thanks to her, we've been able to do it. But I'm looking right now across my office a photograph of my daughter Lucy in a photograph with Tom Brady, and she's at work in that photograph because she runs the NFL account for Gray Advertising. And so she's with these football players and loving it, working her tail off, but loving it. And my second child, Jack, has just started working for New York Life, and my youngest, Tucker, is a senior at Trinity College in Hartford. So, it's just, I mean, and I'm sure you have the same experience, Chuck. It's just, and it's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's so true that what matters most are the loving relationships we make along the way. And in my case, it's at the core of it all is my family.
It's so true, and the family is the core. And then what happens is if we can just take some of that perception, some of that awareness to our workplace and have that level of respect and communication that really needs to take place, then people do work more effectively together, no question about it.
Oh, Chuck, I mean, can you imagine? I mean, we ought to be able to do it, darn it. We ought to be able to just kind of say, let's have a sudden attack of sanity and treat each other well. Everybody, I mean, aside from the few complete misanthropes, everybody would agree with that, and why can't we just start doing that? And gosh, I mean, I'm a child of the 60s, and that was our dream, and peace and love and all that. And we were very naive, but at the same time, it was a dream that I think pretty much everyone can buy into. Of course, how do you do it is the tough question.
Well, we spent a lot of time, just a quick sidebar, FYI, you're going to be on our mindset page. We have a separate page at Core Brain Journal with individuals who are talking about the mind and how to actually set it right and keep it going on track. And we've got a number of people over there who are saying a number of these things that you and I are talking about, and they get into the whole concept of systems 1 and systems 2 thinking. So the relationship of affect and strategy over time and thinking on the long term. Everything you're talking about right now is systems 2 thinking. So what's systems 1? Systems 1 is reptilian thinking. Like, I'm going to eat you, nothing personal. We've been around a few people like that.
Yes,
I think it's time for lunch, and Parker's going to be my lunch. And that's reptilian thinking. It has no time associated with it, no past, no future. I'm going to get this done right now, which then is limited because it's people think reductionistically, and it gets rid of the complexity of the situation, and certainly mind complexity. Now, systems 2 is, here's what we're doing now, but what are the consequences if we don't deal with the entire complexity of it long term? Where are we going long term? Yes. And what you're saying is, Chuck, look, I've been thinking about this a great deal, and I've been thinking long-term strategies for most of my life. I've been doing what I can to practice systems 2 thinking, and thank goodness now we have a name for it. It's a very interesting thing. Kahneman wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and it's all about this. And so, but you're going to be included on that page, by the way, because I think a lot of what we're talking about, and you're a leading expert, international expert on thinking and the process of cognition as it applies to everyday life. 20 books is a library, no question about it. And, and so then the issue is, here is Dr. Ned Hallowell saying, guys, this is something we should be paying more attention to and have a higher degree of structure in terms of the way we approach these complex matters for the evolution of humankind. Now, he didn't quite say it that way, but that is the message.
Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. And how can we develop systems, structures, tendencies, habits, policies, whatever you want to call them, that promote love? At the core, that's the force that does the most good. And anything we can do to promote that, and its cousins, affiliation, attachment, bonding, call it whatever you want, but that's what the world needs now is love, and that's was true when Dionne Warwick sang it, and it's true today. It's a tough sell. Love is a tough sell. I'm not exactly sure why, but I wrote a book about forgiveness, and it didn't sell all that well. And it was called Dare to Forgive. And I often thought if I really wanted to write a bestseller, I should write a book called Get Even.
Yeah, but that would walk off the shelves, Ned.
Fly off the shelves. Get even.
Get even. How to get even. Here is how you can get even. Okay.
Get even and stay out of jail.
Yeah, right. Ned, I have so much enjoyed talking to you. I'm looking at the time because I know you got a hard ending here. We got to get you done. So I think we need to close a little bit. We've covered a number of points. Listeners, I'm going to have the references to Dr. Hallowell's books on the show notes. The links, I think we're going to have the link to his podcast. I need to get over and listen to it. I've just been so busy I haven't listened to it, and I apologize for that, but I think it's going to be do you do interviews over there, or what happens? Or is it mainly your thought about what's going on?
No. They're all interactive. It's all interviews. I did one yesterday. We went to an animal shelter, and I interviewed some dogs.
So they woofed at you, huh?
No, it's all interaction. We should have you on the podcast. It would be fun.
One day it'd be fun. It'd be fun to have you ask me questions. So, where would you, in closing, what are a couple sites that you want to make sure that people go to? Thank you again for being on. And so let's close with where we can go to connect with you.
Well, I'd love you to go to my podcast, distractionpodcast.com, and feast your eyes on that. And of course, my website is just drhallowell.com, Hallowell.com. Also, just to my a website that I'm intimately involved with, an incredible free resource called understood.org, understood.org. Just a wealth of incredibly valuable information, very interestingly presented, aimed at parents of children who have learning differences. So those are a few sites that I'd love to direct people to.
Well, and you folks need to know, I didn't say it in the intro because there was so much to talk about, but Dr. Hallowell, what do you have, 4 clinics around the United States that are that you run? And go ahead and you want to mention those?
Sure. One outside of Boston in Sudbury, Massachusetts, which is where I am right now. One in Manhattan on the Upper West Side, which is where I'll be tomorrow. And then one in San Francisco, which is very small, but hopefully growing. And then another one in Seattle that's run by a wonderful woman, Leslie Todaro. And so we hope to expand beyond that, but that's a start anyway.
You're doing such a service.
Well, as
Dr. Hallowell, we appreciate what you're doing, appreciate your input. Thank you for taking the time today and spending the time with me and with our audience. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a million, Chuck. It's been a real pleasure.
You have a good day, buddy.
You too. Take care. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Core Brain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive, misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications, like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start ADHD medications. They're easily available at corebrainjournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.